Silence is a strategic weapon, more powerful than most people realize. In a world addicted to noise, to rapid responses, to oversharing and overtalking, silence is misunderstood. It's mistaken for weakness, for lack of confidence, for disengagement. But that's only because few have learned how to use it. The truth is, silence is one of the most potent tools a person can master. It's not just about staying quiet, it's about learning how to hold your power without throwing it around, about responding with presence instead of panic. True strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it listens, sometimes it watches, sometimes it says absolutely nothing, and in that nothingness it speaks volumes. When you choose silence, you gain something most people don't even realize they've lost: control. You control the tempo of the room. You control your energy. You control how others perceive you. While everyone rushes to fill the air with sound, opinions, defenses, and noise, the one who holds silence owns the moment. Because silence forces others to stop. It makes them pay attention. It demands presence. And presence, real presence, is power. Chaos feeds on reaction. It wants you to panic, to speak too soon, to show your hand. That's how conflict wins, when it gets you to abandon your calm. But silence disarms chaos. When you don't react, you refuse to be controlled. You create a gap between what happened and how you choose to respond. That gap is your freedom. That gap is your edge. It's in that pause where your mind resets, your emotions rebalance, and your instincts sharpen. When you respond from that place, you're no longer reactive, you are intentional. Silence isn't absence, it's presence, pure, focused, and deliberate. It's the moment a leader looks across the room without saying a word and everyone straightens up. It's the pause before a champion makes their final move. It's the restraint of a wise person who knows that reacting to provocation only gives the other person power. When you embrace silence, you stop operating from insecurity. You stop needing to prove anything to anyone. You start living with inner stillness. And that stillness becomes your armor. Think about the most magnetic people you've met. They're not always the loudest or the most talkative. They don't need to dominate the conversation. They sit, they listen, and when they do speak, every word lands like thunder. That's because their silence gave their words weight. The world listens more closely to the one who rarely speaks. Silence builds gravity. It builds mystery. It makes people wonder what you know, what you're planning, what's going on behind your still eye. And that curiosity, that quiet authority, that's the mark of someone who doesn't chase attention, because attention naturally gravitates toward them. Mastering silence isn't about staying mute. It's about knowing when to speak and when not to. It's about realizing that you don't have to attend every argument you're invited to. You don't have to respond to every insult, defend every action, or explain your every move. Sometimes silence is the most powerful statement you can make. Because when you choose not to waste your energy, you hold on to your power. And in a world full of noise, the one who chooses silence becomes impossible to ignore. Power lies in restraint, not reaction. This is a truth often overlooked in a world that rewards instant replies, emotional outbursts, and the illusion of dominance through volume. But real strength is not about how loudly you can speak or how quickly you can respond. It's about how deeply you can remain composed in the heat of chaos. The most powerful person in the room is rarely the one making the most noise. It's the one who remains centered, calm, and unshaken, especially when provoked. Restraint is misunderstood. Many see it as a sign of weakness, of fear, or indecision. But restraint is not about being passive. It's about choosing your response with precision. It's about recognizing that not every situation deserves your energy, and not every insult deserves your attention. When you master restraint, you conserve your power. You don't leak energy into meaningless battles. You don't waste time trying to win every argument. You understand that not reacting is often the loudest statement you can make. Reaction is easy, it's automatic, it's primal. But that's exactly why it gives your power away. When someone provokes you and you immediately snap, they've won. They've pulled you into their storm. They've dictated your state of mind, and in that moment you are no longer in control. They are. But when you restrain yourself, when you breathe, observe, and choose how to respond, or choose not to respond at all, you regain ownership of your mind, your emotions, and your direction. Restraint is discipline in motion. It's what separates the impulsive from the intentional. The reactive person is driven by ego. They feel the need to be heard, to defend, to prove. The restrained person is driven by wisdom. They know when to speak and when silence says more. They understand that holding their peace is more valuable than winning temporary applause. They think long term. They ask, will this matter tomorrow, next week, a year from now? If the answer is no, they move on in silence, undisturbed. There is power in the pause. When you pause, you create space. Space to reflect, space to rise above, space to act with clarity instead of emotion. And in that space you often find the truth about who you are, what truly matters, and how much control you really have when you don't hand it away with every emotional trigger. People may try to bait you, test you, push your buttons just to see how far they can go. But when you show them that you are unshakable, that your peace is non-negotiable, they learn that their chaos cannot reach you. That's power. Not in the form of domination, but in self-mastery. Restraint is not about silence for the sake of silence. It's about choosing your moments. It's about making every word, every action, every response count. When you stop reacting and start choosing, you elevate yourself. You rise above the noise. And the higher you rise, the less you feel the need to prove anything to anyone. Because that's what true power is. Calm, quiet, deliberate, and unstoppable. Silence builds the perception of depth. In a world where everyone is trying to be seen, trying to be heard, trying to prove something, the person who speaks less becomes an anomaly, an enigma. That silence, when used with purpose, becomes a magnet. It draws people in, it makes them curious, it makes them wonder what you're thinking, what you know, and why you don't feel the need to speak as loudly or as often as everyone else. When you speak less, you force people to lean in, to pay closer attention, and that subtle control of attention is influence in its purest form. People assume that if someone is quiet, they must be thinking deeply. That assumption creates a powerful illusion, and often it's not an illusion at all. Quiet people observe more, they listen more, they read between the lines. They aren't so focused on responding that they miss what's really happening. That's why their presence feels heavier. Their silence isn't emptiness, it's observation, calculation, awareness. When they do finally speak, their words carry weight. Because they haven't been diluted by constant noise. They've chosen their moment. And that moment hits harder because of the silence that preceded it. In conversation, silence can shift power. The person who can sit comfortably in silence controls the tempo. Most people rush to fill awkward pauses, to explain themselves, to keep talking in hopes of being liked or understood. But the person who doesn't rush, they don't need attention, they simply are. And that presence commands respect. Mystery is one of the most underestimated sources of influence. When people think they have you figured out, they stop paying attention. But when they don't know what you're thinking, when they can't predict your next move, they stay alert, they stay engaged. Mystery activates imagination, and imagination is powerful because people begin to build their own ideas about who you are, often projecting more depth and significance onto you than even you may realize. This is not manipulation, it's the natural effect of disciplined silence. In leadership, relationships, negotiations, or even everyday interactions, the person who says less often holds more sway. They aren't easily read. They don't reveal their emotions or intentions too quickly. They remain composed, unpredictable, and thoughtful. This doesn't mean being cold or distant. It means being intentional. It means choosing quality over quantity in your communication. It means knowing that sometimes the most powerful thing you can say is nothing at all. Over time, people begin to associate your silence with strength. They wait for your opinion. They value your insight. They assume that your quietness comes from intelligence, control, and purpose. Whether that's true or not, the perception itself gives you influence. That's the beauty of depth. It's not always about how much you say, but how much people feel when you say it. And when your silence creates space for others to wonder, reflect, or even fear what's behind it, you've stepped into a level of presence that can't be taught. It must be earned through discipline, restraint, and a commitment to stillness in a world that never stops talking. Energy is saved for precision, not noise. In a world overflowing with distractions, emotional reactions, and impulsive behavior, most people waste their energy on what doesn't matter. They speak before they think, act before they plan, and shout just to be heard. But those who truly understand power know that every outburst is a leak. Every unnecessary word, every emotional explosion, every attempt to prove a point drains your energy, your control, and ultimately your influence. Loudness is leakage. It's a sign that someone hasn't yet mastered their inner world. But silence, intentional silence, is conservation. It's the decision to hold your strength, to choose your moment, and to act only when the impact will be sharp, undeniable, and clean. Masters of power don't speak to fill space. They don't act for show. They move with precision, like a surgeon with a scalpel, measured, deliberate, and exact. They understand that every unnecessary action comes at a cost. And because they value their energy, their time, and their mental clarity, they don't give it away easily. Instead, they observe, they listen, they wait, not out of fear or indecision, but because timing is everything. When the right moment comes, they strike, not with noise, not with spectacle, but with clarity that cuts through all confusion. When you operate this way, people begin to notice. You're not reacting like everyone else. You're not exhausting yourself with constant chatter or endless arguments. You're not constantly explaining, defending, or seeking approval. You are grounded, and that groundedness becomes intimidating, because it suggests that you know something they don't, that you see something they've missed, that you've already won a battle they didn't even know they were in. This is what makes quiet strength so powerful. It's economical. It doesn't fight every fight, it doesn't answer every insult, it chooses its battles carefully, and because of that it rarely loses. When you save your energy, you have more to give to the moments that actually matter. You speak when it counts, you act when it changes the game, and because your actions are rare and intentional, they create shockwaves. Loudness, on the other hand, is scattered. It lacks control, it's often rooted in insecurity, the need to be seen, to be right, to be dominant. But dominance isn't about volume, it's about control. Over yourself, over your mind, over your reactions. When you conserve your energy, you protect your power, and that power, when finally released, becomes unstoppable. It doesn't come from desperation, it comes from mastery. Precision requires patience. You must be willing to wait while others waste themselves. You must be willing to endure being underestimated. But when your moment comes, you don't just respond. You redefine the entire conversation. That's what it means to strike with surgical clarity. You say one thing and the room shifts. You take one action and everything moves in your direction. Your energy is currency. Spend it wisely. Don't give it away to noise. Guard it with silence. And when the time is right, deliver your truth with power so sharp it needs no echo. Listening becomes a superpower when silence is embraced with intention. In conversations, in conflict, in everyday interactions, the ones who speak the least often end up understanding the most. While others rush to respond, interrupt, and dominate the space with words, the silent observer is gathering information, reading the room, studying body language, tracking tone, and absorbing what is said and what is left unsaid. This level of attentiveness creates an advantage most people never realize they're giving away, because when you're truly listening, not just to reply, but to understand, you gain insight, and insight is power. Silence sharpens awareness. It heightens your senses. When you're not focused on what you're going to say next, you're fully present in the moment. You notice the slight hesitation in someone's voice, the micro-expression that flashes across their face, the contradiction between their words and their energy. You begin to see patterns others overlook. You detect lies, insecurities, and hidden motives, not because someone told you, but because you were quiet enough to perceive what they didn't want to show. That level of awareness gives you clarity, and with clarity comes control. Control isn't about manipulation. It's about being so grounded in truth that nothing shakes you. When you truly listen, you stop reacting emotionally and start responding intelligently. You're no longer operating from assumption or ego, you're acting from knowledge. You know what the other person wants, what they fear, what they're not saying out loud, and that gives you leverage, not to exploit, but to navigate the situation with wisdom and precision. Most people underestimate how much they reveal when they speak too much. They think talking is strength, but often it's exposure. Every extra word is a clue. Every over-explanation is a signal. Every emotional outburst is a vulnerability shown. But when you listen more than you speak, you gather those clues while giving away nothing. You become unreadable, unpredictable, and difficult to manipulate. You make others reveal themselves without revealing your own hand. That's what makes listening a superpower. It's quiet, but it's incredibly potent. The most influential leaders, negotiators, and thinkers aren't just great talkers. They're exceptional listeners. They speak when it matters, but they listen with purpose. They let others talk themselves into corners, into revelations, into contradictions. They let silence do the heavy lifting. In that silence, people open up. They fill the space with truths they didn't mean to expose, and the listener, sitting quietly, holds all the pieces. Silence isn't passive. It's an active choice to be fully alert, fully aware, and fully in control. It's a form of discipline. It requires patience, humility, and strength. But once you master it, you begin to see how much power there is in saying less and hearing more. You stop chasing influence and start attracting it. You stop trying to win arguments and start understanding people. And that understanding becomes your edge. The one who listens the most often ends up with the most power, not because they took it, but because everyone else gave it away while they were too busy talking. Silence commands respect without ever needing to demand it. There is something about a calm, centered presence that shifts the energy in a room. When someone walks in without needing to speak, without needing to prove anything, yet still captures everyone's attention, that is real power. It's not loud, it's not dramatic, and it's not showy. It's quiet, still, and composed. And because it doesn't chase respect, it naturally attracts it. People are drawn to it, they pay attention to it, they sense something deeper, something unshakable, something they can't quite explain but instinctively recognize as strength. In a world where everyone is trying to be noticed, trying to speak louder, move faster, and dominate conversations, the one who remains silent, observant, and intentional instantly stands out. They don't have to interrupt others to make a point. They don't need to argue to be right. Their silence alone makes people stop and consider what they might be thinking. That mystery, that restraint, creates an aura of authority. It tells others that you don't need external validation because you're already grounded in who you are. And that kind of self-assurance is magnetic. People respect what they can't easily read. When you don't overshare, when you don't react emotionally to every challenge, when you don't constantly try to assert your presence, you create space for others to project depth onto you. Whether you're in a boardroom, a social setting, or a moment of tension, your calm presence becomes the loudest voice. Others begin to look to you, not because you demanded leadership, but because your stillness gave them clarity in the chaos. You become the eye in the storm, the anchor when everything else is shaking. Real power doesn't need to announce itself. It doesn't rely on volume or performance. It knows its own weight. It lets its silence do the talking. The person who carries themselves with this level of control earns respect through their very existence. They don't have to raise their voice. They raise their standards. They don't have to explain themselves. Their energy speaks on their behalf. People listen when they speak, not because they shout, but because they rarely need to. And when they do, it's with intention, and every word lands. What makes silence so powerful is that it can't be faked. It comes from real inner mastery. It comes from being at peace with yourself, knowing your worth and not needing to be reactive to maintain it. That level of calm can't be taught through empty confidence. It's earned through experience, discipline, and self-awareness. When you reach that place, people sense it. They don't know exactly why they respect you, but they do. They don't know why they feel the need to listen more carefully, but they do. Because your silence demands nothing, and yet it commands everything. To walk in silence and still turn heads is to live from a place of quiet strength. Not because you need the world to notice you, but because the world can't help it. That is the ultimate form of respect. It's not forced, it's not chased. It's simply the natural result of mastering your presence, your energy, and your power, all without ever raising your voice. In a world addicted to noise, silence becomes your rebellion and your greatest weapon. The loudest voice isn't always the strongest. True power lies in what is unseen, unheard, and unfelt until the moment it decides to act. When you master silence, you master discipline, you master observation, you master presence. You stop reacting and start responding. You stop leaking energy through constant noise and start channeling it into precision, clarity, and influence. Silence isn't emptiness, it's control. It doesn't mean weakness, it signals depth. It's the stillness that holds storms, the calm that commands respect, and the quiet that carries more weight than 1,000 words. Through silence you gain the edge that others miss. You become the one people watch, wonder about, and listen to when you finally choose to speak. So hold your silence like a blade. Wield it with wisdom. Don't give your energy to every distraction. Don't react to every provocation. Don't shout for respect. Become someone who doesn't need to ask for it. Because when you master silence, you don't just find peace, you become power.